thirst, though the sea water and the sunshine gave us the prettiest imaginable combination of salt prickle and sunburn. In the end, Otoo saved my life, for I came to lying on the beach 20 feet from the water, sheltered from the sun by a couple of cocoanut leaves. No one but Otoo could have dragged me there and stuck up the leaves for shade. He was lying beside me. I went off again, and the next time I came around it was a cool and starry night, and Otoo was pressing a drinking cocoanut to my lips. We were the sole survivors of the Petite Jeanne. Captain Oudouse must have succumbed to exhaustion, for several days later his hatch cover drifted ashore without him. Otoo and I lived with the natives of the atoll for a week, when we were rescued by a French cruiser and taken to Tahiti. In the meantime, however, we had performed the ceremony of exchanging names. In the South Seas such a ceremony binds two men closer together than blood brothership. The initiative had been mine, and Otoo was rapturously delighted when I suggested it. "It is well," he said in Tahitian, "for we have been mates together for 2 days on the lips of death." But death stuttered. I smiled. "It was a brave deed you did, master," he replied, "and death was not vile enough to speak." "Why do you master me?" I demanded, with a show of hurt feelings. "We have exchanged names. To you I am Otoo, to me you are Charlie, and between you and me, forever and forever, you shall be Charlie and I shall be Otoo. It is the way of the custom. And when we die, if it does happen that we live again somewhere beyond the stars and the sky, still shall you be Charlie to me, and I Otoo to you." "Yes, master," he answered, his eyes luminous and soft with joy. "There you go!" I cried indignantly. "What does it matter what my lips utter?" he argued. "They are only my lips. But I shall think Otoo always. Whenever I think of myself, I shall think of you. Whenever men call me by name, I shall think of you. And beyond the sky and beyond the stars, always and forever, you shall be Otoo to me. Is it well, master?" I hid my smile, and answered that it was well. We parted at Papeete. I remained ashore to recuperate, and he went on in a cutter to his own island, Bora Bora. 6 weeks later he was back. I was surprised, for he had told me of his wife, and said that he was returning to her, and would give over sailing on far voyages. "Where do you go, master?" he asked after our first greeting. I shrugged my shoulders. It was a hard question. "All the world," was my answer. "All the world, all the sea, and all the islands that are in the sea." "I will go with you," he said simply. "My wife is dead." I never had a brother, but from what I have seen of other men's brothers, I doubt if any man ever had a brother that was to him what Otoo was to me. He was brother and father and mother as well. And this I know: I lived a straighter and better man because of Otoo. I cared little for other men, but I had to live straight in Otoo's eyes. Because of him I dared not tarnish myself. He made me his ideal, compounding me, I fear, chiefly out of his own love and worship. And there were times when I stood close to the steep pitch of Hades, and would have taken the plunge had not the thought of Otoo restrained me. His pride in me entered into me, until it became one of the major rules in my personal code to do nothing that would diminish that pride of his. Naturally, I did not learn right away what his feelings were toward me. He never criticized, never censured, and slowly the exalted place I held in his eyes dawned upon me, and slowly I grew to comprehend the hurt I could inflict upon him by being anything less than my best. For 17 years we were together. For 17 years he was at my shoulder, watching while I slept, nursing me through fever and wounds, ay, and receiving wounds in fighting for me. He signed on the same ships with me, and together we ranged the Pacific from Hawaii to Sydney Head, and from Torres Straits to the Galapagos. We blackbirded from the New Hebrides and the Line Islands over to the westward, clear through Louisiades, New Britain, New Ireland, and New Hanover. We were wrecked 3 times, in the Gilberts, in the Santa Cruz group, and in the Fijis. And we traded and solved wherever a dollar promised in the way of pearl and pearl shell, copra, bêche de mer, hawkbill, turtle shell, and stranded wrecks. It began in Papeete. immediately after his announcement that he was going with me over all the sea and the islands in the midst thereof. There was a club in those days in Papeete where the pearlers, traders, captains, and riff-raff of South Sea adventurers foregathered. The play ran high and the drink ran high, and I am very much afraid that I kept later hours than were becoming or proper. No matter what the hour was when I left the club, there was Otoo waiting to see me safely home. At first I smiled, next I chided him, then I told him flatly that I stood in need of no wet nursing. After that I did not see him when I came out of the club. Quite by accident, a week or so later, I discovered that he still saw me home, lurking across the street among the shadows of the mango trees. What could I do? I know what I did do. Insensibly I began to keep better hours. On wet and stormy nights, in the thick of the folly and the fun, the thought would persist in coming to me of Otoo keeping his dreary vigil under the dripping mangoes. Truly he had made a better man of me. Yet he was not straight-laced, and he knew nothing of common Christian morality. All the people on Bora Bora were Christians, but he was a heathen, the only unbeliever on the island, a gross materialist who believed that when he died he was dead. He believed merely in fair play and square dealing. Petty meanness in his code was almost as serious as wanton homicide. And I do believe that he respected a murderer more than a man given to small practices. Otoo had my welfare always at heart. He thought ahead for me, weighed my plans, and took a greater interest in them than I did myself. At first, when I was unaware of this interest of his in my affairs, he had to divine my intentions, as, for instance, at Papeete, when I contemplated going partners with a knavish fellow countryman on a guano venture. I did not know he was a knave, nor did any white man in Papeete. Neither did Otoo know, but he saw how thick we were getting, and found out for me, and without my asking him. Native sailors from the ends of the seas knock about on the beach in Tahiti, and Otoo, suspicious merely, went among them till he had gathered sufficient data to justify his suspicions. Oh, it was a nice history, that of Randolph Waters. I couldn't believe it when Otoo first narrated it. But when I sheeted it home to Waters, he gave in without a murmur, and got away on the first steamer to Auckland. At first, I am free to confess, I couldn't help but resenting Otoo's poking his nose into my business. But I knew that he was wholly unselfish, and soon I had to acknowledge his wisdom and discretion. He had his eyes open always to my main chance, and he was both keen-sighted and far-sighted. In time he became my counselor, until he knew more of my business than I did myself. He really had my interest at heart more than I did. Mine was the magnificent carelessness of youth, for I preferred romance to dollars, and adventure to a comfortable billet with all-night inn. So it was well that I had someone to look out for me. I know that if it had not been for Otoo, I should not be here today. Of numerous instances, let me give one. I had had some experience in blackbirding before I went pearling in the Paumotus. Otoo and I were in Samoa. We really were on the beach and hard aground, when my chance came to go as recruiter on a blackbird brig. Otoo signed on before the mast, and for the next half-dozen years, in as many ships, we knocked about the wildest portions of Melanesia. Otoo saw to it that he always pulled stroke oar in my boat. Our custom in recruiting labor was to land the recruiter on the beach. The covering boat always lay on its oars several hundred feet offshore, while the recruiter's boat, also lying on its oars, kept afloat on the edge of the beach. When I landed with my trade goods, leaving my steering sweep apeak, Otoo left his stroke position and came into the stern sheets, where a Winchester lay ready to hand under a flap of canvas. The boat's crew was also armed, the Sniders concealed under canvas flaps that ran the length of the gunwales. While I was busy arguing and persuading the woolly-headed cannibals to come and labor on the Queensland plantations, Otoo kept watch. And often his low voice warned me of suspicious actions and impending treachery. Sometimes it was the quick shot from his rifle, knocking a savage over, that was the first warning I received. And in my rush to the boat his hand was always there to jerk me flying aboard. Once, I remember, on Santa Ana, the boat grounded just as the trouble began. The covering boat was dashing to our assistance, but the several score of savages would have